January 1945. The Philippine jungle. Lieutenant Frank Caldwell felt the world tilt as his Grumman Hellcat shuddered violently, black smoke pouring from the engine cowling. Below him stretched an endless canopy of green, punctuated by the occasional clearing that looked no bigger than a postage stamp from 3,000 feet. His radio crackled with static, and the distant voices of his squadron mates, already turning back toward the carrier. He was alone. The engine seized completely. The propeller froze mid-rotation. In the sudden, terrible silence broken only by rushing wind, Caldwell knew he had seconds to make peace with what came next. Every briefing, every intelligence report, every whispered story in the ready room had painted the same picture. Japanese forces in the Philippines showed no mercy to captured American airmen. Beheadings were common. Torture was expected. Survival was a fantasy. He yanked the canopy release. The wind tore at his flight suit as he tumbled free, counting the seconds before pulling his ripcord. The parachute deployed with a violent jerk that knocked the breath from his lungs. He was descending into enemy territory with nothing but his service pistol, a survival knife, and the absolute certainty that his war was about to end in the worst way imaginable. The jungle canopy rushed up to meet him. Branches tore at his chute, slowing his descent but tangling him in a web of vines and fabric 20 feet above the ground. He hung there, suspended, listening. The sounds of the jungle surrounded him. Birds, insects. The distant rumble of what might have been artillery or might have been thunder. And then, closer, the unmistakable sound of voices speaking Japanese. Caldwell's hand moved to his pistol. He had 6 rounds and then a choice. Capture or the final round for himself. His training officer back in San Diego had been explicit about that. Better a bullet than what the Japanese would do to you. Better a quick end than days of agony ending in a sword blade across your neck. The voices grew closer. He could see movement now through the leaves. 3 soldiers, maybe 4, moving through the undergrowth with the casual confidence of men who owned this territory. They hadn't seen him yet, but they would. Any second now, they would look up and spot the white parachute silk caught in the branches like a surrender flag. And then another voice cut through the jungle sounds. A woman's voice, speaking rapid Tagalog. Caldwell didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. Urgent, commanding. The Japanese voices stopped. There was a brief exchange, the woman's voice rising slightly, and then the sound of the soldiers moving away, their boots crushing undergrowth in a different direction. Silence returned. Caldwell hung in his harness, hardly daring to breathe. Minutes passed. 5, 10. The sun was dropping toward the horizon, painting the jungle canopy in shades of gold and amber. His shoulders ached from the harness straps. His mind raced through possibilities, none of them good. Then she appeared below him. A Filipina woman, perhaps 30 years old, wearing a simple cotton dress and carrying a machete that looked well used. She looked up at him with dark eyes that showed no surprise, as if finding American pilots hanging from trees was something she did every Tuesday. She spoke in accented but clear English. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I am Rosa. You will be silent. You will do exactly as I say. The Japanese patrol will return in 20 minutes. If you want to live, you will trust me." Caldwell nodded. What choice did he have? Rosa scaled the tree with a speed and grace that suggested she had spent her childhood climbing these same trees. She cut him free with efficient slashes of her machete, guiding his descent so he didn't break an ankle on the landing. The moment his boots touched ground, she was gathering his parachute, wadding the silk into a bundle that she shoved into a hollow log. She gestured for him to follow. They moved through the jungle in silence, Rosa leading with the confidence of someone who knew every root and vine. Caldwell's flight boots, designed for carrier decks, not jungle trails, felt clumsy and loud. Every snapped twig made him wince, but Rosa never slowed, never looked back, just kept moving with purpose. They emerged from the jungle as twilight deepened into night. Before them lay a small village, perhaps 20 structures clustered around a central square. At the far end stood a Spanish colonial church, its white walls stained with age and tropical weather, its bell tower rising against the darkening sky like a finger pointing toward heaven. Rosa led him not to the church entrance but around the back, to a narrow door half hidden by overgrown vines. Inside, a stone staircase spiraled upward into darkness. She produced a small oil lamp from somewhere in her dress, lit it with a match, and began climbing. Caldwell followed, his legs burning from the ascent. The bell tower chamber was perhaps 12 feet square, open on all 4 sides to allow the bell ropes to hang down to the church below. The massive bronze bell itself dominated the space, its surface green with verdigris. But what caught Caldwell's attention was what else occupied the chamber: a sleeping mat, a small table with books and papers, a trunk containing what looked like clothes and supplies. This wasn't a hiding place prepared in haste. This was a space someone had been using for a long time. Rosa set the lamp on the table and turned to face him. Her expression was unreadable in the flickering light. "You will stay here. You will make no sound during the day. The Japanese command post is 3 buildings away. They use the village as a staging area. At night, when it is safe, I will bring you food and water. You will not leave this tower. You will not show yourself at the windows. If you are discovered, we will all die. Not just you and me. Everyone in this village." The Japanese do not believe in partial punishment. Caldwell found his voice, rough from fear and dehydration. "Why are you doing this? You don't know me. The risk is insane." Rosa's expression flickered, something passing across her face too quickly to identify. "I have my reasons. They are not your concern. Your concern is to stay alive and stay hidden. Do we understand each other?" He nodded. But questions crowded his mind. Who was this woman? Why was this space already prepared? What were those papers on the table? Before he could ask any of them, Rosa was descending the stairs, taking the lamp with her, leaving him alone in the darkness with only the sound of his own breathing and the distant calls of night birds. That first night, Caldwell didn't sleep. He sat with his back against the bell, feeling its cold metal through his flight suit, trying to process the impossible situation he found himself in. Hours ago, he had been part of a strike force hitting Japanese positions near Manila. Now he was hiding in a church bell tower, dependent on a stranger for his survival, with no way to contact his squadron, no way to let anyone know he was alive. As his eyes adjusted to the darkness, he began to make out more details of the chamber. The papers on the table weren't random. They were organized, stacked neatly, covered in what looked like handwritten notes. Maps too, or at least sketches of the local area, and something else. A small radio, the kind used by resistance fighters, partially hidden under a cloth. The realization hit him like a physical blow. Rosa wasn't just hiding him out of humanitarian impulse. She was already engaged in resistance work. This bell tower was her operations center. He wasn't being sheltered by a kind civilian. He was being hidden by a spy. The implications were staggering. If the Japanese discovered him, they wouldn't just execute an American pilot. They would uncover an entire intelligence operation. Rosa had taken an enormous risk by bringing him here, a risk that went far beyond simple compassion. When she returned the next night, climbing the stairs with a basket of rice and dried fish, Caldwell was ready with questions. But Rosa raised a hand before he could speak. "Yes," she said simply. "I work for the resistance. I gather intelligence on Japanese troop movements. I pass it to guerrilla forces in the mountains. This is why I speak English. This is why I knew how to help you. And this is why you must be absolutely silent during the day. The Japanese commander uses me as a translator. I spend my days in their headquarters, listening to their plans, memorizing their orders. If they suspect anything, we both die." Caldwell stared at her. "You work for them. You translate for the occupation command." Rosa's jaw tightened. "I do what I must to serve my country. Before the war, I was a schoolteacher. I taught English and Spanish to children in Manila. I had a good life, a promising life. When the Japanese came, they needed translators. They gave me a choice: work for them or watch my family suffer. So I work for them, and I use that position to hurt them in every way I can." She set the basket down and moved to the table, her fingers brushing across the papers there. "Every troop movement, every supply shipment, every plan they make, I record. At night, I bring the information here. I encode it. I pass it to the guerrillas. For 3 years I have done this. For 3 years I have lived with the knowledge that one mistake, one moment of carelessness, means death." Caldwell felt a wave of respect wash over him. Back on the carrier, he had thought himself brave for flying combat missions. But what this woman did every single day required a different kind of courage entirely. She walked into the enemy headquarters each morning knowing that discovery meant torture and execution. She smiled at the men who had conquered her country, translated their words, served their purposes, all while betraying them with every breath. The weeks began to blur together. Caldwell spent his days in silence, listening to the sounds of the village below. Japanese soldiers moving through the streets, trucks arriving with supplies, the occasional bark of orders in Japanese. He learned to identify individual voices, to track the rhythms of the occupation. At night, Rosa would come. Sometimes she brought food. Sometimes she brought news from the outside world. The Americans were advancing. MacArthur had returned to the Philippines as promised. Liberation was coming, but slowly, paid for in blood on beaches and in jungles across the archipelago. And they talked. In whispers, always in whispers, they shared their stories. Caldwell told her about growing up in Nebraska, about joining the Navy to see the world, about the strange brotherhood of carrier pilots who lived and died together in the space of heartbeats. Rosa told him about Manila before the war, about teaching children their ABCs, about the moment the Japanese bombers appeared over the city and everything changed forever. One night, perhaps 6 weeks into his concealment, Caldwell noticed something. A photograph, tucked into the corner of Rosa's table, showing her in a white dress standing next to a man in a suit. They were smiling, the picture of a happy couple. "Who is he?" Caldwell asked, gesturing to the photo. Rosa's expression closed off. "Someone from another life." But Caldwell had learned to read her silences. "That's not just someone. That's someone important." She was quiet for a long moment. "His name was Miguel. He was a doctor in Manila. We were engaged to be married. The wedding was planned for December 1941. And then the Japanese came." "What happened to him?" "Nothing happened to him. He is still in Manila, still practicing medicine. He wanted me to marry him anyway, to live quietly, to survive the occupation without making waves. But I could not do that. I could not pretend everything was normal while my country suffered. So I broke the engagement. I came here to my mother's village, and I began to fight in the only way I could." Caldwell heard the pain beneath her words. You gave up your future for this. Rosa met his eyes. I gave up one future for another. Miguel wanted a wife who would be safe, who would keep her head down and wait for the war to end. But I could not be that woman. Every day I spend translating for the Japanese, I am saving lives. Every piece of intelligence I pass to the guerrillas helps our forces, helps your forces. How could I choose a comfortable marriage over that? But the cost, Caldwell said softly. You're alone, you're in constant danger, you've sacrificed everything. Rosa smiled, but it was a sad smile. We all sacrifice in war, Lieutenant. You left your home to fight in a country you had probably never heard of before Pearl Harbor. You risk your life every time you climb into that airplane. We all make our choices about what we can live with and what we cannot. The conversation stayed with Caldwell long after Rosa descended the stairs that night. He found himself thinking about her constantly during the long, silent days, about the courage it took to live the life she had chosen, about the loneliness of her position, trusted by neither the Japanese she served nor fully by the Filipinos who saw her entering the enemy headquarters each day. As February turned to March, something shifted between them. The whispered conversations grew longer, more personal. Rosa began to linger in the bell tower, sitting on the floor beside him, their shoulders almost touching in the darkness. They talked about everything and nothing, books they had read, places they wanted to see after the war, the small, human things that connected two people thrown together by impossible circumstances. One night, Caldwell made a confession. I was terrified when I crashed. Not just of dying, but of dying badly. Of being captured, tortured, beheaded like so many others. When you found me, when you brought me here, you didn't just save my life. You saved me from that fear. Rosa turned to look at him, her face barely visible in the lamp light. And you, she said quietly, have saved me from something too. What could I possibly save you from? I'm the one hiding in your bell tower, from forgetting why I do this. For 3 years I have lived with fear and isolation. I have had no one to talk to, no one who understands. The villagers see me as a collaborator. The guerrillas see me as an asset. The Japanese see me as a tool. But you see me as a person. That is a gift I had forgotten existed. Their eyes met in the darkness, and in that moment something unspoken passed between them, a recognition, a connection that went deeper than circumstance or necessity. Caldwell reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. But she didn't. His hand found hers, their fingers intertwining. Neither of them spoke. Words would have broken the spell, would have forced them to acknowledge what was happening and all the reasons it was impossible. Because it was impossible. He was a Navy pilot who would return to his carrier when liberation came. She was a resistance fighter whose work was far from over. They came from different worlds, different lives. Their connection existed in a bubble outside normal time, sustained by whispered conversations in a bell tower while war raged around them. But in that moment, impossibility didn't matter. What mattered was the warmth of her hand in his, the sound of her breathing, the knowledge that they had found something precious in the midst of horror. March brought news that changed everything. The Americans were closing in on Manila. The Japanese were retreating, consolidating their forces. Rosa came to the tower one night with urgency written across her face. They are pulling out, she said without preamble. The command post is being evacuated. They are moving north toward the mountains. In 3 days, maybe 4, the village will be free. Caldwell felt a surge of relief followed immediately by something else. Something that felt uncomfortably like dread. That's good news. That's what we've been waiting for. Yes, Rosa said. But her voice carried no joy. It is good news." They sat in silence, both understanding what liberation meant. It meant Caldwell could leave the bell tower, could rejoin his unit, could return to the war he had been fighting before his plane went down. It meant Rosa could stop her dangerous double life, could step out of the shadows. It also meant the end of their nightly conversations, the end of the strange, suspended intimacy they had built in this tower above the world. "What will you do?" Caldwell asked. "After liberation? Will you go back to Manila, back to teaching?" Rosa shook her head. "I do not know. Manila is destroyed, I hear. The fighting there was terrible, and I am not the same person who left. I do not know if I can go back to teaching children their ABCs after everything I have seen, everything I have done." "And Miguel?" The question came out before Caldwell could stop it. Rosa's expression was unreadable. "Miguel belongs to a different life, a life that ended in December 1941. I cannot go back to that any more than I can go back to being the person I was before the war." Caldwell took a breath. "Rosa, these past weeks I have to tell you something." She placed a finger on his lips, stopping him. "Do not say it. Please, if you say it, it becomes real. And if it becomes real, it becomes something we must deal with, something we must make decisions about. Let it remain unspoken. Let it be something that exists only here, in this tower, in this moment." But Caldwell gently moved her hand away. "I have to say it, because in 3 days I might not have another chance. Rosa, I have fallen in love with you. I know it's impossible. I know we come from different worlds. I know that when this war ends, we will go our separate ways. But I need you to know that these weeks with you have meant more to me than anything else in my life. You are the bravest, most remarkable person I have ever met. And whatever happens next, I will never forget you." Tears glistened in Rosa's eyes. She didn't speak for a long moment. When she did, her voice was barely a whisper. "I love you too. God help me, I love you too. And you are right. It is impossible. You have a life waiting for you in America. I have a country to rebuild. We cannot be together. But I am grateful, so grateful that we had this time." They held each other in the darkness of the bell tower, two people caught between duty and desire, between the lives they had and the life they might have had in a different world. The next 2 days passed in a strange blur. The Japanese evacuation proceeded with military efficiency. Trucks loaded with equipment and supplies rumbled through the village. Soldiers marched in formation, heading north toward defensive positions in the mountains. Rosa made her final trips to the headquarters, gathering last pieces of intelligence even as the enemy prepared to abandon their position. On the 3rd night she came to the tower with news. "They are gone. The last of them left at sunset. American forces are expected tomorrow, maybe the day after. You will be free soon." Caldwell should have felt elation. Instead, he felt only a profound sense of loss. "And you? What will you do?" Rosa sat beside him one last time. "I will wait with you until the Americans come. I will make sure you are safely returned to your people. And then I will decide what comes next." They spent that final night talking, memorizing each other's faces in the lamplight, storing up memories against the separation they both knew was coming. As dawn approached, Rosa prepared to leave as she always did. But this time Caldwell caught her hand. "Come with me. When the Americans arrive, come with me. We can figure out the rest later. We can find a way to make this work." Rosa cupped his face in her hands. "My darling Frank, it does not work that way. You have duties, I have duties. We have both sacrificed too much to abandon those duties now, even for love, especially for love. Then promise me something. Promise me that after the war you will find me, or let me find you. Promise me this is not the end." Rosa kissed him, soft and lingering. "I promise to try. That is all I can promise. I promise to try." The Americans arrived the next afternoon. Caldwell heard them before he saw them, the rumble of jeeps and trucks, voices shouting in English, the sounds of liberation. Rosa came to the tower one last time, bringing an American officer she had flagged down. The officer, a young lieutenant from the 1st Cavalry Division, stared at Caldwell in amazement. "Lieutenant Caldwell, sir, you were listed as killed in action. Your squadron held a memorial service. Reports of my death were greatly exaggerated," Caldwell said, trying for humor but hearing his voice crack. "This woman saved my life. She hid me for 16 weeks. She risked everything." The officer looked at Rosa with new respect. "Ma'am, the United States military owes you a debt we can never repay." Rosa shook her head. "I did only what any person should do. Now please take care of him. Get him back to his ship." As soldiers helped Caldwell down the bell tower stairs, his legs weak from weeks of inactivity, he kept looking back at Rosa. She stood in the tower chamber, framed by the open archway, watching him go. Their eyes met one last time. No words, just a look that carried everything they could not say. The Army lieutenant arranged for Caldwell's transport back to his carrier. The reunion with his squadron was emotional, his fellow pilots crowding around, unable to believe he was alive. His commanding officer debriefed him extensively, taking notes on everything that had happened. "And the woman who hid you," the commander asked, "this Rosa, did you get her full name, her contact information? The Navy will want to recognize her service." Caldwell realized with a sinking feeling that he didn't have answers to those questions. In 16 weeks of nightly conversations, they had talked about everything and nothing. But they had never discussed practicalities, never exchanged addresses or full names. Their connection had existed outside such mundane details. "I will find out," he told his commander. "I will go back to the village and get that information." But when he returned 3 days later, Rosa was gone. The villagers were polite but unhelpful. Yes, they knew Rosa. Yes, she had helped the American pilot. No, they did not know where she had gone. Perhaps Manila, perhaps somewhere else. The Philippines was a large country, and many people were displaced by the war. Caldwell searched for weeks, using every resource available to him. He contacted resistance groups, Army intelligence, anyone who might have information about a Filipina translator who had worked for the Japanese while spying for the guerrillas. But Rosa had vanished as completely as if she had never existed. Eventually, duty called him back. The war was still raging. Japan had not yet surrendered. Pilots were needed. He returned to his carrier, to the endless cycle of missions and danger, carrying Rosa's memory like a talisman. The war ended in August 1945. Caldwell survived, returning to the United States with a chest full of medals and a heart full of questions. He tried again to find Rosa, writing letters to Philippine government offices, to relief organizations, to anyone who might help. Some letters went unanswered. Others came back with polite responses that led nowhere. Years passed. Caldwell built a life. He left the Navy, went to college on the GI Bill, became an engineer. He married eventually, a kind woman from his hometown who gave him 3 children and a stable, comfortable life. But he never forgot the woman in the bell tower, never forgot the whispered conversations in the darkness, never forgot the impossible love that had sustained him through 16 weeks of fear and uncertainty. In 1967, 22 years after the war ended, Caldwell received a letter. The return address was Manila. Inside was a single sheet of paper, covered in familiar handwriting. "Dear Frank," it read, "I hope this letter finds you well. I hope you have built a good life. I have thought of you often over the years, wondering if you remember our time in the bell tower, wondering if it meant as much to you as it did to me. I am writing now because I am dying. Cancer, the doctors say. I have perhaps 6 months. Before I go, I wanted you to know that I kept my promise. I tried to find you. But by the time I had the resources and stability to search, you had already moved on with your life. I learned you were married, had a family. I did not want to disrupt that, so I stayed silent. But I want you to know that you were not forgotten. You were never forgotten. What we had in that tower was real and precious. It was a light in the darkness of war. Thank you for seeing me as a person when the world saw me only as a tool or a traitor. Thank you for loving me when I had forgotten how to be loved. I hope your life has been full of joy. You deserve nothing less. With love always, Rosa." Caldwell sat in his study, tears streaming down his face, holding the letter with trembling hands. His wife found him there hours later, still sitting in the darkness, clutching a piece of paper from across the world. He flew to Manila. He had to try. But when he arrived at the address on the letter, he found only a small apartment, empty except for a few pieces of furniture. The landlord told him Rosa had died 3 weeks earlier. She had no family, no close friends. She had lived quietly, working as a translator for international businesses, never marrying, never speaking much about her past. There was one thing, the landlord said. She left instructions that if an American man named Frank ever came looking for her, I should give him this. The landlord handed Caldwell a small wooden box. Inside was the photograph he had seen in the bell tower all those years ago, the one of Rosa in a white dress standing next to Miguel. But there was a second photograph now, tucked behind the first. A photograph Caldwell had never seen before. It showed him, asleep in the bell tower, his head resting against the bronze bell. Rosa must have taken it during one of those long days when he dozed in the tropical heat. On the back in her handwriting were 3 words, "My impossible love." Caldwell returned to the United States carrying both photographs and a grief that felt as fresh as if the war had ended yesterday instead of 22 years ago. He never spoke publicly about Rosa, about the bell tower, about the 16 weeks that had changed his life. It was too personal, too precious to share with a world that would not understand. But he kept her photographs. And every year on the anniversary of the day his plane went down, he would take them out and remember. Remember a schoolteacher who became a spy. Remember whispered conversations in the darkness. Remember an impossible love that had survived war but could not survive peace. Remember a woman who had sacrificed everything, including her own happiness, for a cause she believed in. The story of Frank Caldwell and Rosa might have ended there, lost to history like so many wartime romances. But in 1989, a researcher working on a book about Philippine resistance movements discovered Rosa's intelligence reports in a Manila archive. The reports were remarkable for their detail and accuracy, providing information that had helped American forces plan their liberation of the Philippines. The researcher began investigating, tracking down survivors, piecing together the story of the mysterious translator who had risked everything. The trail led eventually to Caldwell, now in his 70s, living in quiet retirement. At first, he was reluctant to talk, but the researcher was persistent, and finally, Caldwell agreed to tell his story. He spoke for hours, describing the crash, the rescue, the bell tower, the nightly conversations. He showed the researcher Rosa's letter and the photographs. The researcher's book, published in 1991, brought Rosa's story to light. It detailed her intelligence work, her courage, her sacrifice. It also told the story of her relationship with Caldwell, the impossible love that had bloomed in a bell tower while war raged below. The book sparked interest in Rosa's story. The Philippine government posthumously awarded her their highest civilian honor. The U.S. Navy, at Caldwell's urging, recognized her contribution to the war effort. A small memorial was erected in her village, near the church with the bell tower where she had hidden an American pilot and stolen moments of happiness in the midst of horror. Caldwell attended the memorial dedication in 1992. He was 81 years old, moving slowly, but his mind was sharp. He stood before the memorial, looking up at the bell tower where he had spent 16 weeks of his life, and spoke to the gathered crowd. "Rosa saved my life," he said, "but she did more than that. She showed me what true courage looks like. Not the courage to fly a plane into combat, but the courage to live every day with the knowledge that discovery means death. The courage to sacrifice personal happiness for a greater cause. The courage to love even when love seems impossible. I have lived a long life. I have been blessed with family and success and peace. But I have never met anyone braver than Rosa. And I have never stopped loving her." He died 6 months later in his sleep at his home in Nebraska. His family found the photographs on his bedside table, where they had been every night for 47 years. In his will, he left instructions that he wanted to be cremated and his ashes scattered in the Philippines, in the village where Rosa had saved him, near the church with the bell tower. His family honored that request. On a warm day in 1993, they scattered his ashes in the small square in front of the church. The bell in the tower rang as they did so, its sound carrying across the village and out into the jungle beyond. A final farewell to two people who had found love in impossible circumstances and carried it with them until the end. The story of Frank Caldwell and Rosa resonates because it captures something essential about war and human connection. Wars are fought by nations and armies, but they are experienced by individuals. And sometimes, in the midst of unimaginable horror, individuals find moments of grace, moments of connection, moments that remind them why survival matters. Caldwell and Rosa's story also challenges simple narratives about the war. Rosa was not a simple heroine. She worked for the Japanese occupation, translated their orders, served their purposes. To many of her neighbors, she was a collaborator, but she was also a resistance fighter, risking her life every day to undermine the enemy from within. She lived in moral complexity, making impossible choices, sacrificing her own happiness for a cause larger than herself. Their love story was impossible not just because of circumstances, but because of who they were. Both were people defined by duty. Caldwell could not abandon his squadron, his country, his war. Rosa could not abandon her resistance work, her people, her mission. Their love existed in the space between duty and desire, never able to fully resolve that tension. And yet, it endured. For 47 years, Caldwell carried Rosa's memory. For 22 years after the war, Rosa carried his. They built separate lives, fulfilled their separate duties, but never forgot what they had found in that bell tower. Never forgot the whispered conversations in the darkness. Never forgot that for 16 weeks in the midst of war, they had found something precious and impossible and real. The bell tower still stands in that Philippine village. The church is active again, serving a community that has rebuilt itself in the decades since liberation. Tourists occasionally visit, drawn by the story of the American pilot and the Filipina resistance fighter. They climb the spiral stairs to the chamber where Caldwell hid and Rosa worked. They look out over the village and the jungle beyond, trying to imagine what it was like to spend 16 weeks in that small space, knowing that discovery meant death. But the real story is not in the physical space. It is in the choice two people made to see each other as fully human in circumstances designed to strip away humanity. It is in the courage to love when love seemed impossible. It is in the sacrifice of personal happiness for duty, and the lifelong grief that sacrifice entailed. It is in the recognition that war creates not just heroes and villains, but complex human beings making impossible choices in impossible circumstances. Frank Caldwell went to war expecting to fight for his country. He never expected to find love in a bell tower. He never expected to meet a woman who would change his understanding of courage and sacrifice. He never expected that 16 weeks of whispered conversations would shape the rest of his life. Rosa went to war expecting to resist in whatever way she could. She never expected to hide an American pilot. She never expected to fall in love with the man she was protecting. She never expected that a chance rescue in the jungle would give her both the greatest joy and the greatest sorrow of her life. Their story reminds us that war is not just about battles and strategies. It is about individual human beings caught in circumstances beyond their control, making choices about who they want to be and what they are willing to sacrifice. Sometimes those choices lead to heroism. Sometimes they lead to tragedy. Often they lead to both. In the end, Frank Caldwell and Rosa found something in that bell tower that transcended war and duty and circumstance. They found a connection that sustained them through decades of separation. They found a love that was impossible and precious and real. And they found in each other a reminder that even in the darkest times, human beings are capable of extraordinary grace. The bell still rings in that tower, calling the faithful to prayer, marking the hours, echoing across the village and the jungle beyond. And if you listen carefully, in the spaces between the chimes, you might hear the whispers of two people who found love in impossible circumstances and carried it with them until the end. Two people who remind us that duty and desire, sacrifice and love, courage and grief are not opposites, but intertwined threads in the complex tapestry of human experience. Two people who, for 16 weeks in 1945, proved that even in war, even in impossible circumstances, love can bloom and endure and transform everything it touches.